What started as a simple moment, a man trying to enter his own property, turned into a full-scale standoff between an HOA president desperate to keep control and a homeowner backed by the same men who once protected his life overseas. The sound of tires crunching over the gravel driveway should have marked the first satisfying moment of homecoming for Gregory Holt, a 42-year-old real estate developer who had just closed on the kind of mansion most people only dream of. But as his black Escalade slowed to a stop at the gate of his new estate on the northern edge of Dallas, something felt immediately off. The gate wasn't opening. It wasn't even trying. Instead, three figures stood planted directly in front of it, blocking his path. At the center stood a woman who carried herself like she controlled the entire neighborhood. Mid-50s, blonde hair shaped into a flawless helmet, navy blazer stiff with authority, Sandra Whitfield, president of the HOA. The kind of leader people tolerated only because challenging her was too exhausting. Flanking her were two men in polos and khakis, the usual HOA enforcers who normally issued minor warnings about lawn heights or trash cans. But today they stood shoulder to shoulder like Gregory was an intruder. Gregory rolled down his window halfway, trying to understand the situation. What's going on here? His voice was calm, but it carried enough edge to cut through the warm Texas air. Sandra crossed her arms. This community has strict standards. We don't let just anyone through these gates. I'll need proof of ownership before you set one tire past this point. Gregory blinked, surprised. He had the closing papers in his briefcase, but the way she said it didn't feel like procedure. It felt like a test. I signed the papers yesterday, he replied. This is my property. My gate. My driveway. Her lips curled into a thin smirk. You'll understand if I'm skeptical. We don't usually see people like you buying homes here. The line landed heavier than the humidity. Before he could respond, one of the men stepped forward. Sir, we can stand here all day, or you can show us the documents. Rules are rules. Gregory leaned back, exhaling slowly. He dealt with all kinds of confrontations, contractors, committees, developers, but this wasn't about documents. It was about control. Across the cul-de-sac, neighbors peeked out from behind hedges. A mother pulled her child inside. Another neighbor lifted a phone and hit record. The tension in the air shifted like heat over asphalt. Gregory stepped out of the Escalade. At 6'2", broad-shouldered, and steady, he didn't need to posture. His presence alone made the two men shift uneasily. I have nothing to prove, he said evenly. But if you want to see the papers, fine. I'll show them. Just remember this moment, because when I drive through that gate, it'll be as the rightful owner of this home. He turned toward his vehicle, but Sandra's voice snapped across the driveway. Don't play the victim, Mr. Holt. Our community has standards. We've worked too hard to keep expectations high. Gregory stopped and looked back at her. Standards, he repeated, or prejudices? The words sliced cleanly through the quiet street. Her enforcers looked away, uncomfortable. Gregory reached for his briefcase, but before he could retrieve the documents, a row of headlights appeared at the end of the road. 3 SUVs rolled in, engines low, steady, deliberate. Doors opened, and men stepped out, calm, methodical, not a single wasted motion. Gregory didn't have to introduce them. Their formation said everything. These weren't friends. They were his brothers from special operations. Men who had walked through fire beside him overseas. Sandra's smirk vanished. Her enforcers shifted like they suddenly realized they were outmatched. Neighbors leaned farther out of their doorways, phones raised higher. The entire street held its breath. Gregory didn't speak. The men behind him didn't need words. Their quiet stances and steady eyes carried more weight than any HOA rulebook. Sandra swallowed but forced her chin up. Mr. Holt, I don't know who these people are, but this is a private matter between you and the HOA. Bringing outsiders doesn't change anything. Gregory gave a short, humorless laugh. They're not outsiders. They're family, and I invited them. That mansion behind you is my home. And tonight, I'm welcoming the people who had my back when it mattered. You think an HOA checkpoint is going to stop me from walking into my own house? The taller enforcer, Brett Lanning, stepped forward. His jaw was tight, but his voice was unsure. Sir, if you have the proof, just show it. Then we're done here. But Sandra snapped. No, Brett. This is about more than papers. If we start letting anyone who claims they belong drive through, the entire community suffers. The smaller enforcer, Neil, tightened his grip on his clipboard. He has the keys, he muttered. And that's not a rental. Sandra cut him off with one glare. Gregory's patience wore thin. He opened his briefcase and held the deed high. The deed, he said plainly. Signed yesterday at the Tarrant County Clerk's office. You have 30 seconds to look, or I'm putting it away and calling the sheriff for blocking legal entry. For the first time, Sandra hesitated. Her hands twitched, but she didn't reach for the document, not with half the neighborhood watching. Phones were recording everywhere. A teenager whispered, "Dude, this is insane." Gregory's men didn't move. They didn't have to. Their presence pushed the situation forward by itself. Finally, Sandra said, "I'll need to verify this with the board." Gregory stepped forward until only the gates separated them. His voice dropped low, firm. "I'm not asking for permission. I'm telling you, I own this home, and you blocking me isn't about safety. It's about who you think belongs here. And you're wrong." Sandra flushed. Her enforcers stared at the ground. Neil even muttered an apology. Gregory slid the deed back into his briefcase and snapped it shut. He turned toward his men. "We're done waiting." They stepped forward in quiet unison. No threat, no aggression, just certainty. Their presence alone forced Sandra back. Gregory pulled the small remote from his pocket, the gate opener he received at closing. He pressed it once. With a mechanical groan, the gates began sliding open. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Sandra froze. Brett and Neil exchanged looks that said the fight was over. Gregory climbed back into his Escalade. Engines behind him rumbled as the convoy prepared to follow. The vehicles rolled through the gate, leaving Sandra stiff in the wash of their headlights, her authority cracking. But Sandra wasn't the type to back down quietly. And the neighborhood wasn't done with this fight. Even after the SUVs disappeared into the driveway, the street stayed frozen. Phones kept recording. Porch lights flicked on. Some neighbors whispered that the HOA had gone too far. Others insisted Sandra was just doing her job. Sandra stood rigid by the gate. Brett and Neil lingered nearby, looking miserable. "You saw the papers," Brett said quietly. He had the remote. "That should be enough." Sandra's eyes flashed. "Don't question me. Not in front of them." Neil shifted his clipboard. "He belongs here, Sandra. Anyone could see that." She didn't answer. She spun and marched toward her SUV. Up the driveway, Gregory parked in front of the mansion. The house was supposed to symbolize victory, years of effort finally paying off. But instead of pride, he felt the sting of what had just happened. He had dreamed of stepping into his home for the first time with his friends beside him. Instead, he had been treated like a stranger on his own land. Marcus Devereaux broke the silence. "Man, I've seen checkpoints in Afghanistan friendlier than that." The others chuckled lightly. The humor didn't land. Gregory forced a small smile. "They wanted a show. We gave them one. Let's not let them ruin tonight." Isaac Moreno leaned against his SUV, eyes still toward the street. "They're still watching. Half the neighborhood probably has this online already." Gregory exhaled slowly. "Let them watch," he murmured. "Maybe it'll remind them I'm not going anywhere." But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't that simple. Once a community decides someone doesn't belong, every step becomes a performance. He'd seen it in boardrooms, in politics, even in the neighborhood he grew up in. It never mattered how much money you made or what papers you held. There were always people eager to remind you that they controlled the gates, literally and figuratively. Back at the entrance, Sandra's SUV rumbled awake, but she didn't drive off. Instead, she lowered her window and snapped at Brett and Neil. "This isn't over. Tomorrow morning, I want reports on my desk. We're calling an emergency board meeting. If he thinks a deed gives him permission to bypass community standards, he's in for a surprise." Neil frowned. What standards did he even break? Sandra's stare hardened. Owning that house. Having friends. Her lips pressed thin. "You don't understand how these things work. If we lose control now, we'll never get it back." Brett rubbed his face, exhaustion settling in. Control or pride? Sandra didn't answer. She hit the gas and sped off, her taillights disappearing into the dark. Inside the mansion, Gregory's men followed him through the double doors into a vast foyer. Marble floors, towering ceilings, the smell of fresh paint and polished wood. It should have been impressive, but the silence felt heavy. Isaac set a bottle of bourbon on the counter. "We came to celebrate, brother, not stew over some HOA queen. Let's raise a glass." Gregory managed his first real smile that night. He poured drinks, handed them around, trying to drown the bad taste Sandra had left behind. They clinked glasses, the sound echoing through the empty house. To new beginnings, Marcus said. To holding your ground, Isaac added. Gregory lifted his last. To never letting anyone tell us where we belong. They drank. The bourbon burned warm, but the celebration never fully landed. Gregory caught them glancing toward the windows now and then. The faint glow of neighbors' cameras still pointed at the house. Sandra hadn't won tonight, but she hadn't surrendered either. Gregory could feel it. This was only the beginning of a conflict he never wanted. By morning, the air in the neighborhood carried a strange charge. Word of the confrontation had spread like wildfire, videos already circulating online. Clips of Sandra squaring off with Gregory at the gate. Some captions declared, HOA president blocks new homeowner. Others painted Gregory as an outsider forcing his way in. By sunrise, the lines had already been drawn. Gregory woke early and stood on the balcony, looking out at the manicured lawns. He wanted to feel proud, but instead he felt observed. Even at dawn, a jogger slowed to a near stop, eyeing the house as if trying to confirm he was the same man from the viral clips. Inside, his friends made coffee in the kitchen, trading stories in low voices, but even their laughter felt muted, overshadowed by the neighborhood watching. His phone buzzed with a text from a number he didn't recognize. What happened last night? You didn't deserve that. Welcome to the neighborhood. Then came the sound of tires on gravel. A black sedan rolled to a stop in his driveway. Sandra stepped out, clipboard in hand, dressed like she was heading into a courtroom. Brett and Neil trailed behind her, far less confident than the night before. Gregory opened the door before she could knock. Didn't expect to see you again so soon. Sandra gave a stiff smile. Mr. Holt, we need to talk about. I showed you the deed, he cut in. Gate opened. End of story. She ignored the jab and stepped onto the porch. The board held an emergency session this morning. We reviewed the situation, and there are several violations we need to address. Violations, Gregory repeated. I moved in yesterday. She flipped through her papers. Parking multiple large vehicles overnight without approval. Hosting a gathering without notifying the association. And the display of military equipment. Gregory barked a laugh. Military equipment? You mean my friends? They're people, not tanks. Marcus and Isaac appeared behind him, coffee mugs in hand. You regulating how many friends a man can have? Marcus asked. Sandra's composure slipped, but she pressed on. This isn't personal. These are community standards. No, Gregory said, stepping closer. This is personal. You didn't question my paperwork because of standards. You questioned it because you didn't like what you saw when I rolled down that window. Her jaw locked. Before she could respond, Brett murmured, he's not wrong. Neil added quietly. Feels like we crossed a line. Sandra glared at both men, but didn't back down. You think you can undermine me? I've been HOA president for 10 years. People trust me to keep order. And you think you can walk in and treat me like the enemy? Gregory didn't flinch. You treated me like I didn't belong. You called it standards. Everyone else saw what it really was. Silence swallowed the street. Neighbors gathered again, some watering lawns that didn't need watering, others openly recording. Sandra finally snapped. You may have won last night, but I'm not finished. The HOA has power, Mr. Holt. And power means nothing without respect, Gregory replied. Right violations all day? In the end, you'll still be the person who tried to stop a man from walking into his own home. The hit landed. Brett shifted. Neil muttered another apology. Sandra turned sharply and retreated to her car, heels striking the driveway in rapid clicks. Gregory stood on the porch, tension tightening his chest. He wanted to celebrate a new chapter, but instead he was caught in a fight he never asked for. Isaac broke the silence. She's not letting this go. Gregory nodded. Yeah, but neither am I. But while Sandra plotted her next move, Gregory's past, and the people who lived it with him, were about to remind the neighborhood what loyalty looked like. That evening, long shadows stretched across the driveways. Normally this street looked like a magazine cover. Kids biking, sprinklers misting across green lawns, porch lights flicking on in perfect rhythm. But tonight, calm shattered again. Gregory stood on the front porch with Marcus and Isaac, planning to unpack the last boxes, when a low growl of engines rolled into the cul-de-sac. Not just the 3 SUVs from before, this time a convoy. 4 trucks, windows down, headlights slicing through the dusk with military precision. outstepped men and women Gregory hadn't seen in months. Jeans, button-downs, casual clothes, but all with that same unmistakable posture. Former special ops. Brothers and sisters forged in fire, bonded by loyalty that didn't waver. Carla Jennings was the first out, tall, sharp-eyed. She pulled Gregory into a fierce hug. "Heard you had drama at the gate," she said, voice edged with steel. "Word does travel too fast," Gregory replied. "Too fast," Isaac added. "Pretty sure the whole internet's tuning in." Then came Damian Brooks, broad-shouldered and grinning. "You get a mansion, and the welcome wagon is a firing squad?" Figures. The porch filled quickly, laughter mixing with tension, but their eyes kept drifting toward the street, where neighbors gathered again. Some curious, some nervous, some outright hostile. It didn't take long for the HOA to reappear. Sandra's silver SUV crawled down the street like a predator. She stepped out, posture rigid, lips tight. Brett and Neil followed, both looking like they wanted to be anywhere else. Sandra took in the sight, the porch now crowded with nearly a dozen of Gregory's people, and for the first time, her confidence faltered. "This," she declared loudly, "is exactly what I warned the board about. Excessive vehicles, disruptive gatherings, a threat to the peace of this community." Damien crossed his arms. "Lady, we're veterans. We've kept streets safe a lot rougher than this one." Carla stepped up beside Gregory. "You want safety? Maybe start by not blocking people from their own property." Sandra flushed. "You have no authority here." Gregory's voice was calm. "Neither do you. Not anymore. Every person here is my guest. They don't need your approval. And the neighbors watching? They see who's really tearing this place apart." Brett whispered, "Maybe we should go." But Sandra wasn't done. She stepped closer. "You think you can rally an army for intimidation? My neighborhood. My rules. You don't scare me." Carla laughed once, sharp. No one even raised their voice. "If you're scared, it's not of us." The entire street went silent. Neighbors froze. Even the insects seemed to pause. Sandra felt the shift. Authority gone. She wasn't leading. She was unraveling. Gregory stepped off the porch and closed the distance. "This ends now," he said quietly. "You don't get to decide who belongs. You don't get to treat me like a trespasser in my own home. Push this any further, and it won't be an HOA matter. It'll be a legal one. And you'll lose." Her hands trembled. Brett and Neil didn't move to defend her. They just looked down. Unwilling to argue any longer with half the neighborhood watching, Sandra finally turned back toward her SUV. Her heels struck the pavement in sharp, angry clicks. Gregory's friends didn't celebrate, didn't taunt, didn't even smile. They simply stood there, quiet, steady, unshaken, as if their presence alone said, "We're here, and we're not going anywhere." But even as Sandra retreated, Gregory knew she wasn't finished, and neither was the neighborhood. That night, hardly anyone on the street slept. Porch lights burned later than usual, blinds stayed tilted just enough to peek through, and phones buzzed nonstop as messages flew through private group chats. The videos of Sandra and Gregory weren't just circulating online anymore. They had become the topic of every driveway conversation, every kitchen table debate, every hushed chat in the backyard. Some neighbors whispered to their spouses that Sandra had crossed the line. Others insisted Gregory had escalated the situation by showing up with backup. But no matter which side they took, everyone could feel it. Something in the neighborhood had changed. Sandra, who once ran the HOA like her personal kingdom, had been humbled in front of the very people she claimed to lead. The next morning, Gregory drove to a cafe in Plano just to clear his head. He needed distance from the mansion, the stairs, and the noise. Sitting with a cup of black coffee, he scrolled through the flood of online chatter. One video had already passed 10,000 views, reposted with captions like "HOA president tries to block new owner" and "Special ops crew steps in." Some comments praised him for standing his ground. Others dripped with bitterness, accusing him of stirring drama for attention. Gregory sighed, set his phone aside, and rubbed his temples. "Day 2, he muttered, "and I'm already a headline." Meanwhile, back in the neighborhood, Sandra wasn't licking her wounds quietly. She called a handful of loyal residents to her home for what she dramatically labeled an emergency strategy meeting. Around her polished oak dining table, she spread printed screenshots of Gregory's deed, clips of the confrontation, and a thick copy of the HOA bylaws. "Do you see what he's doing?" she said, her voice rising with every word. He's trying to make me the villain. But this isn't about me. It's about protecting the standards we built here. Trisha Lambert, who had never disagreed with Sandra in her life, nodded immediately. We can't let him turn this place into a spectacle. What if property values drop? What if the wrong kind of attention keeps coming? But Gerald Knox, a board member who rarely challenged anyone, shifted in his seat. Sandra, I watched the videos. He showed his deed. He had the gate remote. You can't keep acting like he doesn't belong. Sandra slammed her palm on the table hard enough to rattle the glasses. He humiliated me in front of everyone. If I let this go, I lose the authority I've built. Do you want this community to fall apart? The room fell silent. Trisha nodded obediently, but Gerald's uneasy quiet weighed even heavier. Meanwhile, Gregory returned home to find a couple in their 60s, Howard and Denise Carter, waiting near his driveway. Howard cleared his throat nervously. Mr. Holt, he began, voice careful but sincere. We just wanted to welcome you properly. Last night, that wasn't right. Not everyone here feels the way Sandra does. Gregory studied their faces for any sign of hidden judgment, but saw only honesty. He nodded. I appreciate that. I didn't come here to fight anybody. I just want to live in peace. Denise handed him a plate of cookies wrapped in foil, her hands trembling slightly. We hope you'll give the neighborhood a chance. He smiled softly. Thank you. Really. From the porch, Marcus watched with crossed arms. Once the couple walked away, he muttered, Some are with you. Some are against you. Same as always. Gregory exhaled. Yeah, and Sandra's not finished. She's cornered, and cornered people strike back. He was right. That evening Sandra called another meeting, this time with the full HOA board. She walked in with a new plan, drafting fines against Gregory for unauthorized gatherings and vague security concerns. Gerald pushed back instantly. This is personal, Sandra. Everyone can see it. You're not protecting the community, you're protecting your pride. Her eyes flashed. If you can't support the rules, Gerald, maybe you don't belong on this board. The silence that followed was suffocating. Even Trisha looked uncomfortable this time. Sandra no longer seemed like a confident president. She looked like someone clawing desperately for control, and the board was starting to see it. Back on Gregory's porch, his friends gathered again as night settled in. The atmosphere was calmer than the night before, but tension still clung to the air. Supportive neighbors waved when they passed. Sandra's loyalists avoided eye contact. Gregory took a slow sip of bourbon, staring down the empty street. But the moment the storm hit, Gregory's resolve and the loyalty of his friends would face a test the neighborhood never saw coming. The HOA board meeting wasn't normally something that drew a crowd. Usually they were dull gatherings spent arguing about landscaping budgets and pool maintenance. But this time was different. Word had spread that Sandra was calling a special session to deal with violations, and half the neighborhood showed up, some to defend her, others to see whether Gregory would challenge her again. The meeting took place in the community center, just a block from Gregory's new home. Rows of folding chairs filled the room, a buzz of conversation humming above them. Sandra sat at the front, gavel in hand, her expression hard as concrete. Trisha sat on her left, Gerald on her right, the rest of the board forming a stiff line beside them. Gregory didn't walk in alone. He entered with Marcus, Carla, and Damien beside him, their quiet, steady presence drawing just as many stares as whispers. They weren't trying to intimidate anyone, but their unity was impossible to ignore. Sandra slammed her gavel. This meeting is called to order. We have a matter of community concern that requires immediate attention. She launched into a long list of alleged violations: unauthorized gatherings, excessive parking congestion, disruptions to community standards. Each accusation sounded more rehearsed than the last, like charges read from a courtroom script. Gregory raised his hand. I'd like to respond. Sandra's eyes narrowed. This is not a debate. The board is addressing the violations. Gerald cleared his throat. Actually, Sandra, by procedure, he's allowed to respond. Her jaw tightened, but she gestured stiffly. Fine. Go ahead. Gregory rose, tall and grounded, his voice calm but carrying through the entire room. Yesterday, on the day I moved in, I was met at my own gate by the HOA president and two enforcers who blocked me from entering my home. I showed proof of ownership and was still denied. That's not enforcing standards. That's harassment. Gasps rippled through the room. Some neighbors nodded. Sandra slammed the gavel again. That is a distortion of events. Gregory lifted his hand. There are videos. The entire neighborhood saw what happened. Some of you filmed it yourselves. So let's not pretend this didn't happen. This isn't about cars in a driveway. It's about someone deciding who does and doesn't belong here. The silence was thick. Neighbors shifted uncomfortably. Even Tricia looked unsure. Damien leaned forward. If the board wants to fine him, then fine us too. We were there. We were the unauthorized gathering. You going to police friendship now? Carla added. You claim this is about safety, but the only unsafe moment I saw was an HOA president standing in front of a man's car to block him from entering his own home. Sandra's voice trembled. You don't understand how this community works. This is about rules, about preserving what we've built. Gerald finally snapped. Protecting what, Sandra? Property values? Or your pride? Because right now, you're dragging this entire neighborhood into a fight none of us asked for. The crowd erupted, some clapping, others murmuring. Sandra hammered her gavel again and again, but her authority was slipping with every echo. Gregory looked her in the eye. I didn't move here to fight. I came here to live, to work, to build a life. You made it personal when you stood at my gate. And I'm telling you now, it stops today. Sandra's lips trembled, but she refused to back down. You think you can shame me? You think you can parade your friends around until I give in? I've been president for 10 years, and I don't bow to intimidation. Gregory's response was soft, almost gentle. I'm not asking you to bow. I'm asking you to do your job. Protect this neighborhood. And that includes protecting people like me. The room was still. Neighbors looked between the two of them, weighing every word. And then an older woman in the back, Martha Higgins, stood up and said loudly, Enough, Sandra. He owns that house. He belongs here. Let it go before you tear this community apart. The applause that followed wasn't wild, but it was firm. And it wasn't for Sandra. Her face flushed crimson. Meeting adjourned. She snapped, slamming the gavel one last time before storming out. Tricia hurried after her. Gerald stayed behind, meeting Gregory's eyes with quiet respect. Gregory sat down again, but he had no idea that Sandra's next move would be her boldest yet, forcing the entire neighborhood to choose sides. 2 days after the meeting, the neighborhood felt like a pressure cooker. Conversations turned sharp and whispered. Lines had been drawn. Half the residents believed Gregory had exposed something rotten in the way things were run. The other half clung to Sandra's authority, as if acknowledging her mistakes would unravel everything. Gregory tried to live normally. Mornings unpacking. Afternoons walking the property with contractors. Evenings relaxing with his crew. But no matter what he did, eyes followed him everywhere. Joggers slowed down to stare. Kids on scooters paused until their parents called them inside. Even package deliveries became little neighborhood spectacles. On the third evening, it reached a breaking point. Gregory returned from Home Depot with Marcus to find a bright orange notice taped to his gate. Letters bold and angry. HOA. VIOLATION. NOTICE. The listed charges? Unauthorized use of property. Security risk to residents. And the most unbelievable one. Failure to maintain neighborhood harmony. Marcus ripped the notice down. They're not even pretending anymore, he said. She's weaponizing the rules. Gregory rubbed his face. She's desperate. But this isn't just about me now. If she can twist the rules for me, she can twist them for anyone. Before he could say more, neighbors began gathering at the curb. Some whispered. Others filmed. And then, like it was planned, Sandra's silver SUV pulled up. She stepped out with the swagger of someone who believed she still ran the place. Brett and Neil followed, though they didn't look nearly as confident as they once had. Sandra raised her voice, addressing Gregory and the entire crowd. This is proof, she declared, that no one is above the rules. Mr. Holt has repeatedly disregarded our bylaws, hosting unauthorized gatherings, intimidating board members, and disturbing the peace of this neighborhood. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone shouted, "That's not true," while another muttered, "She's right, we don't want chaos here." Gregory stepped forward, the crumpled violation notice in his hand. "This," he said, holding it up for all to see, "is a lie. Every word of it. I've lived here less than a week, and somehow I'm already being accused of destroying harmony? You all know what's really happening." Sandra's voice sharpened. What's happening is accountability. If you can't respect this community's standards, then maybe you chose the wrong neighborhood. Carla, standing just behind Gregory, couldn't stay silent. Standards or prejudice disguised as paperwork. The crowd erupted again, some cheering, others booing. Phones rose higher as people recorded every second. Gregory turned slowly, addressing the neighbors directly. His voice was calm, but each word landed like a weight. Ask yourselves this. If it were you, if tomorrow Sandra stood at your gate and told you that you didn't belong, that your friends weren't welcome, that your presence was a problem, what would you do? Would you bow your head? Or would you stand up? A murmur swept through the crowd. Howard and Denise Carter, the elderly couple who had brought him cookies days before, stepped forward. Howard raised a hand. We saw it. We were there. Gregory showed all his paperwork, and Sandra still refused to let him through. That's not leadership. That's control. Others nodded. A younger neighbor chimed in. I've lived here 3 years. Never seen anyone treated like that at the gate. Not once. Sandra's face reddened, her composure cracking as more voices turned against her. You're letting him manipulate you. He's turning you against your own board. From the back, Gerald Knox finally stepped forward. No, Sandra. You did that yourself. We trusted you to represent us. And instead, you weaponized the HOA. That ends now. Applause burst through the crowd. Louder this time. Confident, united. Sandra stood frozen, her authority slipping away in the very spot she once controlled. Gregory lowered the violation notice and let it drop to the pavement. You wanted a public fight, he said steadily. Here it is. And now everyone can see who's telling the truth. For a long moment, Sandra didn't move. Her hands clenched, her face pale. That night, after the confrontation, the neighborhood turned strangely quiet. No porch conversations, no kids racing scooters, no casual driveway gatherings. The standoff had left a mark, one deep enough to split the community straight down the middle. Inside his mansion, Gregory sat at the long dining table with his friends scattered around him. Half-eaten takeout and untouched drinks surrounded them. The usual jokes and banter were gone, replaced by a heavy silence. Carla broke it first. She's losing ground. Half the neighborhood clapped for you last night. She can't hold on forever. Gregory leaned back, eyes fixed on the chandelier above. Maybe, but people like her don't go quietly. She'll look for another angle. Marcus tapped the table, then beat her at her own game. She wants to hide behind bylaws. Fine. Learn them better than she ever did. Fight her where she thinks she's strongest. Isaac shook his head. Or don't fight her at all. Win them over. Show them who you actually are. Not with paperwork, with presence. Gregory considered both paths. He wasn't only dealing with Sandra anymore. He was dealing with the story she was trying to attach to him. And the only way to rewrite a story was with action. The next morning, he acted. Instead of keeping to himself, he stepped into the neighborhood like he'd lived there for years. He waved at joggers. He stopped to chat with the family across the street. When kids played basketball in the cul-de-sac, he asked for a shot and sank it clean, earning cheers. Word spread fast. Gregory wasn't hiding. He wasn't sulking behind mansion walls. He was present, approachable, real. Faces that once watched him with suspicion began to soften. That evening, Howard and Denise knocked on his door again, this time accompanied by 2 younger families he hadn't met. They stood awkwardly until Denise spoke. We just wanted to say we're sorry for how you were treated. This community isn't supposed to be like that. You've shown nothing but respect since you got here. Gregory smiled warmly. I appreciate that. I bought this house because I wanted peace, not conflict. But peace takes all of us, not just me. A younger man, Ethan Brewer, stepped forward. Sandra's been running things unchecked for years. Most of us stayed quiet, because it was easier. But last night showed us how far she's willing to go. Gregory nodded. The only way things change is if people speak up. Not for me, but for yourselves. This is your neighborhood. You deserve leadership that respects you. They talked for nearly an hour, conversations flowing naturally. When they left, it wasn't just with handshakes. It was with a promise. Gregory wasn't alone anymore. Meanwhile, across the neighborhood, Sandra sat in her living room as her phone buzzed nonstop. Messages, videos of the confrontation, residents openly questioning her leadership, some even calling for a vote of no confidence. For the first time in a decade, Sandra felt her grip slipping, and she hated it. Back at the mansion, Gregory stood on the porch with his friends under the warm Texas night. This isn't about a house anymore, he said quietly. It's about respect. About reminding people that no one has the right to decide who belongs. Marcus raised his glass. To belonging. Carla added. To standing your ground. Gregory lifted his own. And to proving that dignity beats control every time. They clinked glasses, the sound sharp in the still air. For the first time since moving in, Gregory felt a spark of what he'd hoped for, community. Not inherited, but built. Not assumed, but earned. Sandra wasn't finished, but Gregory had already won the battle that mattered most, gaining the trust of the people around him. The vote was scheduled for Thursday evening at the community center, the same room where Sandra once ruled effortlessly. But this time, the energy was different. Chairs filled quickly, conversations buzzing louder than usual. People weren't there out of obligation. They wanted to see what would happen. Gregory sat in the middle of the room, not up front, choosing not to look like someone campaigning for power. Marcus and Carla took the seats beside him. Across the room, Sandra occupied her place at the head table, posture stiff, lips tight. Her supporters clustered near the front. Everyone else spread out, whispering. Gerald opened the meeting. We're here tonight to address a motion regarding leadership and trust. This neighborhood has been divided, and it's time to decide how we move forward. Sandra jumped in instantly. Let's be clear. Everything I've done has been to protect this community. I've upheld the standards for a decade and won't apologize for enforcing rules that keep our property values high. The room murmured, some agreeing, some shifting uneasily. Gerald nodded and turned to Gregory. Mr. Holt, you may respond. Gregory stood, facing not Sandra but the neighbors. His voice stayed steady. I didn't ask for any of this. I came here to start fresh, to enjoy the home I worked hard for. But from the moment I arrived, I was treated like an intruder. I showed documentation. I showed respect. And still, I was blocked at my own gate. That wasn't about rules, it was about control. And you all saw it. He paused, letting the silence settle. This isn't about me versus Sandra. It's about all of you. Because if it can happen to me, it can happen to anyone. No one should live in fear of harassment from their own HOA. Respect should be the foundation, not suspicion. Soft claps began, growing louder. Sandra slammed her hand on the table. You're twisting everything. He's brought division and disruption since day one. Is this really the example you want? Gregory didn't budge. If you want to talk about examples, fine. I believe in neighbors supporting each other. I believe in veterans, teachers, retirees, families, everyone, being treated with dignity. If that's division, then we need to ask who's really dividing us. This time the applause thundered. Sandra looked around for support. Many avoided her eyes. Gerald raised a hand. We'll put it to a vote. Those in favor of retaining Sandra as HOA president? A small cluster of hands rose. And those in favor of removing her? The majority of hands shot up. Some people even stood. The result was undeniable. By majority vote, Gerald announced, Sandra Whitaker is hereby removed as HOA president, effective immediately. Gasps and cheers mixed as Sandra packed her papers with trembling hands. She didn't argue. She didn't speak. She simply walked out, the door closing softly behind her. Gregory stayed seated, his friends watching. He didn't gloat. He simply exhaled, relief washing over him. Later, as he closed his front door, he left viewers with one message. Wherever you live, never let anyone tell you that you don't belong. Stand tall. Stand firm. Demand respect. Because everyone deserves it. If you believe in that message, subscribe for more stories that matter.